The United States Congress is funding terrorist enemies. This is a case for impeachment of Congress for genocide, treason, and fraud. The summer of 2008 found the Congress of the United States voting to ban drilling for oil offshore and in the best areas of richest deposits inland. The vote of our Congress was open affirmation and approval to retain the shackles of economic slavery on we the people, the citizen owners of those valuable resources, who wear the shackles of slavery daily in servitude to our oil and gasoline providing enemies. God provided these resources for our benefit, yet we are sold as slaves by our Congress to our oil-producing enemies to treat us as they wish. Congressional oil and gas refinery bans, with their legislative landmines and bureaucratic bear traps, are set to snare any entity that seeks to drill out our own oil resources in and around America, or from setting up new gasoline refineries, handcuffing and effectively banning oil and gasoline production in the United States of America. We, the people who own these resources, can't use them, forced to buy the same resources from our enemies at whatever price they dictate. The Speaker of the House refused then to allow a vote on the issues, even with America in economic crisis, our citizens paying exorbitant prices, paying windfall profits to our terrorist enemies, in effect funding our enemies to war against our nation. Legends in their own minds, dictators Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid just said no. Elected representatives morphed in their minds into omnipotent dictators to just say no. They say no to the citizens who own these resources, called natural resources, for a reason and purpose. Nature provides them. Resources are for human benefit. They say no to the poorest of the poor in this country, the working homeless, struggling to survive by placing on their backs the exorbitant and artificially inflated cost of gasoline at the pumps in America. That causes inflated prices to ride the bus to work, or the obsolete cheap car the poorest of the poor drive prayerfully every day. Omnipotent dictators, calling themselves Congress, are stealing milk from the mouths of innocent babies, vitamins from poor children, bread from the tables of the poor, hope from the homeless, quality of life from our elderly and disabled on fixed incomes where inflated fuel prices take no prisoners and choices are freezing to death or buy fuel or transportation. The poorest of the poor, desperate to survive, while Congress chooses instead to steal their fixed or limited earnings from their mouths to pay inflated costs and exorbitant profits for fuel that feeds the rich foreign countries that provide our fuel. There's no excuse for such hard hearts. They should be convicted of child abuse, elderly abuse, and abuse of power. The omnipotents reject the oil and gasoline-based transportation system of America that gives our citizens great economic advantage over foreign countries, forced into economic slavery of foreign oil terrorists. The omnipotent dictators declare the citizen-owned natural resources off limits, forcing us to purchase the same resources from our enemies at whatever price they choose for us to pay, regardless of market conditions. They prefer cold turkey termination of oil and gasoline, forcing Americans to use alternative sources of fuel for our vehicles that are prettier in their eyes. Right now, today, just stop using gasoline and begin to use our pretty energy that really exists only in their world, the wonderful world of Washington, a world without smelly old gasoline. Their insanity is showing. Our entire country depends on trucking goods inland from the coast and borders and return with life-saving food to our grocers. Shutting down gas and diesel fuel supplies for 3 to 4 weeks will starve our children, our poor, our homeless, our elderly, creating chaos, but our streets will sure smell nicer. Of course, we have our strategic reserve of 2 months of national supply, which our omnipotent dictators believe is plenty of time to get the solar, wind, and nuclear bio this and that, the hybrids and coal and steam ready to replace gasoline in our cars and trucks. Sure, 2 months should be plenty of time to develop these alternative fuels. Why, we'll just call Dorothy and get her to click her heels and repeat, "There's no place like home. There's no place like home." We'll awake and everything will be lovely in the wonderful world of Washington. Of course, everywhere else in America, the country's shut down, out of gas, the laughingstock of the planet. President Obama dictates change, meaning no more spoiled Americans eating all they want to eat and deciding their own temperature indoors. Fuel prices dictates buses, bicycles, and walking for the poorest of the poor, able to get to work, and a death sentence for those who can't. National genocide of the poor, homeless, disabled, and elderly is forced upon them because they can't transport themselves to work. They're sentenced to a brutal, premature, needless death on the streets, while our disconnected president and Congress makes international apologies for our way of life, saying Americans are the problem by using too much gasoline. California itself is the #1 consumer of gasoline in the world, and President Obama says we can't expect oil countries to fuel our extravagance. Yes, America, a select few, now dictate a forced lifestyle for all. Tyranny and genocide rule. In 2001, President Bush put a detailed plan together for drilling offshore in ANWR and other areas in our own country where America has more oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. Naysayer political opponents united, they announced and defeated this plan by attacks of dishonesty against President Bush, that he was just looking to reward his big oil buddies by increasing their share of American oil expenditures. Complete dishonesty rejected, distorted, and suppressed the truth of the issues in order to win a stupid game of power politics, stealing food and milk from the mouths of our poorest and neediest citizens. Our babies, children, disabled, and elderly were victimized and paid the price personally, while the victorious politicians drank toasts and patted each other's backs. When Hurricane Katrina knocked out several vital American gasoline refineries, President Bush again asked Congress to remove the bureaucratic bear traps and legislative landmines preventing new gasoline refineries from being built in America. Dictator Congress united to say no again and no again, forcing gasoline prices to the highest levels in history, breaking the backs of our poorest of the poor, including the homeless and working class poor. America would have oil and gasoline from its own natural resources had we followed the leadership of President Bush every year since 2001 and began drilling for our own oil while building gasoline refineries that were bureaucratic free. Today, we would be enjoying the reduction of gasoline imported from our terrorist enemies from 70 to some lesser amount. More American gasoline supply is less American money given to our terrorist supporting enemies. A good thing only an enemy of America would oppose. This ongoing act of treason, conspiracy, and fraud must be reckoned with now, as the liberal lunacy has starved our poorest citizens, and it must be stopped immediately. Forcing America to fund our enemies by giving them $700 billion each year for gasoline and oil that we could have produced ourselves, for billions less stolen from the pockets of our poorest citizens, is willful and malicious treason. Forcing America to pay $3 or $4 per gallon for gasoline when we could and should have produced our own American gasoline much cheaper is a criminal conspiracy against every American citizen, collective owners of our natural resources. America has been sold into economic slavery by our dictator Congress, forced against our will and freedom of choice to a much lower standard and quality of living in our homes, our cars, and even our groceries, where food prices have tripled from ignorant experiments using a food staple to stretch vehicle fuel by 10 at a cost of $400. Corn is now more valuable to sell for fuel than food, since ethanol can be produced for as little as $8 per gallon, 4 times the cost of gasoline. Now, we continue to pay $8 per gallon for ethanol fuel and $300 more for food that has corn components, like chicken and eggs, because chickens eat corn for food. Beef and milk costs escalate because cows eat corn to give us beef and milk on the table. The poorest and neediest among us beg us to stop the dictator Congress that is killing citizens cruelly by their ignorance. Will we stop this domestic genocide? We're now working 4 longer days weekly instead of 5 days, while claiming publicly that drilling and delivering more American soil oil to the marketplace is not a viable solution. Whereas throwing more money at technologies that have been around for 25 years and have yet to be perfected to replace the energy of oil and gasoline, that's the answer of the insane dictator Congress led by Harry and Nancy. Where is our outrage and our demand for justice for our dictator Congress, who conspire with our terrorist enemies, all of whom are laughing at us while raking in the $700 billion annually in earned oil revenues that could and should be kept in American accounts, paying American taxes, funding American programs to benefit America's poor and needy, instead of stealing food and milk from their mouths?